Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History Podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about the Enlightenment and the state of human nature. We're going to do 3 major philosophers and how they explain how the universe works, how people work, because we can't do everybody. So we're going to do Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. So what is the Enlightenment? The Enlightenment is the application of scientific ideas, of the scientific method, to societies and government. So, yeah, it's one thing to apply it to planets. It's another thing to apply it to people. And so what these philosophers are trying to do is take the ideas of science and apply them to people's governments and society. What they are really writing about, and they're doing that, but the major question is, do they support or are they against absolutism? So we have to talk about what is absolutism. Well, absolutism is the concentration of executive, legislative, and judicial power in one person, usually the king, the Burger King, the king. So it means all the power in one hand. The executive executes the laws, it does the laws, it enforces the laws. It also uses the army. The legislative makes the laws. It argues, it debates, it decides what the laws are. And judicial decides whether or not people or institutions are following those laws. Absolutism says they're all the same person. The person who makes the laws, the person who enforces the laws, and the person who judges whether or not people are following the laws is one person, the king. What's the advantage of this? Well, unified laws, unified religion, culture, language, heritage. One king, and you get a country. Like, you get France. The French king owns France. And the laws in France are the French king's laws. And the religion of France is the French king's religion. And the language of France is the king's French. And the culture will be what the king believes should be the culture. The art and the style and the way to live, the proper ways of living. The disadvantage is the king has all the power, which means a lot of people who want some power get none. So there's jealousy. But there's also another problem, which is, what if you have a bad king? If the king has all the power, that's great. That's great. Our system, the American system, is built for the president to be George Washington. It's just like the Roman Empire was built to have Octavian Augustus as the emperor. Well, great. That system works if you have a Washington. John Adams wasn't Washington. And John Adams is a great guy. He's not Washington. You have a whole host of guys in the middle, and near the end, Nixon is not Washington. And so, what if you have a bad king? You have an entire system based upon having an awesome king makes the system work. What if you have a bad one? The system will break down. By definition, you have problems. So what's the justification for this? Why does the king get all the power? Of all the people, I mean, the Pope makes a claim, right? Why does the king get the claim? And the answer is divine right. God said so. It's a philosophy that says God said so, which means you can't object to it. God said so. And who said God said so? The church. The priests do. The priests tell the people. Look, it says right here. And you've had this. You've seen people do this. Like, during President Trump's first 3 years, they pull out parts of the Bible that are like, you should listen to the king. You should always listen to government. Don't object at all. Are those parts in the New Testament? Yeah. Because they were living under the rule of the Roman emperor. Like, if you revolt, the Roman emperor kills you. See Jerusalem in 70 AD. You have a revolt. The Romans obliterated Jerusalem, picked up the Hebrews, picked up the Jews, scattered them throughout the empire so they would disappear. Like, of course you got rules saying don't revolt. The Romans didn't take revolt very, very lightly. And so But the idea was, if God said so, if God says the king gets all the power, you can't object. It's natural. It's part of life. It's the way things are. It is what is. All right, let's get to our philosophers. So our first is Hobbes. Hobbes is going to write a book called Leviathan. So this is what it tells you about government. It's this thing that is everywhere. So I've been in conversations with people who are like, oh, can't we just not talk about politics? Can't something just not be political? Hobbes tells you everything's political. Everything is politics. Politics is underneath everything. Why? Well, he's coming out of the English Civil War. He looked at the English Civil War, which was the most destructive war that had happened in England up to this time. They murdered the king at the end of it. 2% or 3% of the population was dead. The government had fought against itself. This is a trauma. This is a disaster. They get a republic, which people have conveniently forgot, till 1660, from what, 1649 to 1660, for about a decade. You have Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth, which was a republic. And you're talking about violence of English people killing other English people that they weren't used to. And this is a trauma that Hobbes is trying to explain. And his answer is that people in the state of nature, that people without any government, people where there are no rules, where there is no religion and no grandpapa telling you what to do, where there is no government, a libertarian's dream world is awful because people are awful. The most famous sentence that comes out of the 600 or so pages is, life is nasty, brutish, and short. People are bad. People are violent to each other. So what is government? Government is weak people crowding around the strong for protection. It is the strong person saying to the weak people, you're going to give me loyalty. You're going to give me money. You're going to give me stuff, something. And in exchange, I will protect you from me and from other strong people or groups. That government is the weak being exploited by the strong, but being protected by the strong. And so what you get is silos of government. Of the King of France is strong. The King of England is strong. And what's their agreement? Well, they have agreement with each other. They don't have an agreement with the poor people of France. The English king doesn't care what the French people think. He cares what the French king thinks. And the French king doesn't care what the English people think. He cares what the English king thinks. So you get, and this is kind of how Twitter works, you get people at a certain level communicating with each other. And that's where you get diplomacy. So you get the strong negotiating with each other, with other strong, and making agreements. And that's diplomacy. I am going to exploit my people, and you stay out of it. Okay, but I'm going to exploit my people, and you stay out of it. Not a problem. As long as your exploited people don't mess with my exploited people, we're copacetic. Great, I like that. And boom, diplomacy, government. Why? Why would people put up with this? Because disorder is worse. Remember, life without government, life without religion is nasty, brutish, and short. It's man against man. It's war versus war. It's everyone at war against everybody else. It's Iraq, 2005. It's Syria, 2013. You have seen Hobbesian states. It's Nicaragua, 1988. You have seen these places where the entire society collapses in on itself and everyone is murdering their neighbors. You don't want to live like that. I don't want to live like that. So what do I put up with? I put up with the government making laws, the government having cops that can tell people what to do, the government telling me I have to pay taxes so it could do stuff. I put up with those things so that I don't have to worry about my neighbor coming into my house and murdering me for chocolate milk. Because people are evil. People are violent, according to Hobbes. People in the state of nature are terrible. You want an example of Hobbes? You've read Lord of the Flies. That's Hobbes. Where all order breaks down. So government is allowed to be oppressive. Government is the thing holding violence back. So do you have a right of revolution? No. No, because no matter how bad the government is, it's not worse than the Civil War that people lived through. It is not worse than friend against friend, brother against brother, neighbor versus neighbor, murdering each other for chocolate milk. And I've gotten into fights with people on Twitter about this. And you get these people, and they're probably Russian bots because they can't be real people. And about like Saddam Hussein. And they're like, you don't think Saddam should have been overthrown? You're pro Saddam, you're pro Ba'athist. You know they were violent. I'm like, yeah, they were incredibly violent. But you know what? I have had refugee students from Iraq who have shown up in 2007, 8, and 9. And their grandparents are dead. Their brothers are dead. Their cousins are dead. I had one who talked about how her sister had to be a prostitute in a labor camp in Syria before they got to escape to America. Every one of my Iraqi refugee students said the same thing. Saddam was bad, but civil war was worse. We could put up with Saddam. We would like him to have changed. We would like to have gotten rid of him. But what happened to us was worse. And if you're one of the 5 million freaking Syrians on the move, Assad is bad. Yes, Assad is a bad guy. But Assad 2008 is better than Aleppo 2015. And so that's what Hobbes is talking about. You don't get a right to revolt because what will be unleashed is so much worse. So how do you get the American Revolution or the French Revolution? Well, that's our friend Locke and his second treatise on government. Now, Locke will write about a lot of stuff. He's English as well, but his big, important work is the second treatise on government. Now, Locke, who is also English, he's the next generation after Hobbes. He didn't live through the English Civil War, or he might have been young when it happened. But his important event is the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Well, you know from the name that it was a good thing. And what's the Glorious Revolution? The Glorious Revolution is when it's basically Nixon resigning. It's when people went to James II, the nobility went to James II and knocked on his door and said, Mr. King, nobody wants you to be king anymore. We'd like you to leave. And your son-in-law, your daughter's husband, has landed with an army. He's perfectly cool with you leaving, but if you want to fight, he will. But nobody wants to fight for you. So how about you just, move to France? And James II said, okay. He was mad about it. He threw the Privy Seal into the river, to the Thames, but he left. So it was an overthrow, it was a bloodless coup of the government that the elites of England changed kings without a civil war happening. And so for Locke, that totally changes his opinion about people. So his idea is that the purpose of government is not oppressing the weak and protecting them from violence by other strong. The purpose of government is the protection of life, liberty, and property. Life, liberty, and property, which Thomas Jefferson is going to change into the pursuit of happiness. So to have this idea, people in the state of nature, remember, without laws, without government, without religion, what are people really like when they're on the island all by themselves? And his answer is, people are great. People are awesome. People are wonderful. People are capable of making great decisions and doing great things. The problem is when you put a bunch of people together. When they're by themselves on their lonely island, they're great. But when you put them together, you run into problems because one person's freedom, bumps into someone else's freedom. And so what his argument is that to make government so that we can protect life, liberty, and property, people have to give up rights. This is why I don't like the gun debate lobby, because they act like, why should I have to give up my right? Because that's what society does. I give up my rights all the time. So you give up your right to carry a bazooka, I give up my right to carry a bazooka, and guess what we're able to do? Have a class. Because if we have a class and everyone's carrying a bazooka, we don't have a class. The four-way stop sign is probably the best example of Locke. Why? Because when you arrive at a four-way stop sign, what do? What are you told to do? You let the person who got there first go. Everyone stops. You let the person who got there first go. And then you get the student, right? You get the teenager who's like, what if everyone gets there at the same time? Then nobody goes. And you're like, no, there's an answer. You let the person to your right go. And then the student will go, but everyone has someone to their right, so nobody goes. And you're like, you've missed the point, man. See that thing flying over your head? That was the point. The point is, you give up your right to go first. You let someone else go. And if you weren't such a selfish teenager, which is not your fault because your brain's not fully developed yet, you'd understand that it doesn't matter who goes first as long as it's not you. You let someone else go first. You give up your right so that other people can go. Because if everyone goes at the same time, you're all going to crash into each other and lose your life and your liberty and your property. So government is the free declaration, the contract between people that I will give up certain rights to the government to protect my life, liberty, and property. That's the idea of Locke. Well, what if you have bad government? What if you have government that says, thank you for all of those rights? We want more. We're going to take more. Well, that's a tyranny. And the Second Treatise on Government, the Glorious Revolution, says, if you don't like it, the people can overthrow it. Because they could create a new government that protects their life, liberty, and property. Because people are awesome. So what do you do with bad government? You get rid of it. So do you have a right of revolution? Yes. Yes, you get a right of revolution. You don't live under bad government. You recreate it. Now that's important because it means God did not create government. Hobbes says the same thing, which is very important. Both of them object to divine right. Both of them say government comes from people, and it's a contract. For Hobbes, it's a contract of the powerful and the weak. For Locke, it's a contract between equals, of citizens. Which one is American? Well, life, liberty, and tells you. And yet, America's not completely Lockean, by the way. There's a little bit of Hobbes, especially in the southern colonies. And that brings us to Rousseau. Rousseau is the Bernie Sanders. Rousseau is the hippie. Rousseau is the guy who even libertarians think has gone too far. Rousseau is writing about he's French, absolutism. And in French absolutism, he's powerless. Everyone who's not the king is powerless. So he's dealing with that, which is different from Hobbes and his trauma from the English Civil War, and it's different from Locke, from his success in the Glorious Revolution. So Rousseau looks at society where the king and the church are in charge, and he says people are born free. When you're born, there's no rules on you. You could do whatever you want. You're a baby. You cry when you want to cry. You poop when you want to poop. You burp when you want to burp. You eat when you want to eat, as long as someone will feed you, but, you could eat when you want to eat. People are born free, but live everywhere in chains. His idea is that people are awesome. That in the state of nature, they're the noble savage. Everything they do is right. Everything they do is honorable. In the state of nature, without rules and government and society and religion, everyone is Washington. They don't tell lies. They walk straight. This is an idea that goes all the way back to Gilgamesh and Enkidu, if you took my 101 course. The noble savage. We'll see it again when we talk about Brave New World in the post-World War I societies. That they're the people who live outside. This is Tarzan. The people who live outside of society are purer. Because civilization is corrupting. It makes you weak. That people are better on their own. His argument is that civilization, that living in society, in cities, with rules and government and religion, sucks. And this is a long tradition in philosophy. It goes all the way back, as I said, to Gilgamesh, the first story that's ever written down. And it goes through the modern philosophers of Sigmund Freud and Michel Foucault, who say the same thing. That civilization screws you up. Freud's book, Civilization's Discontents, Foucault's book on the history of sexuality, are all about how civilization imposes rules on you. Foucault's innovation is, it's even in the language. It's even in civilization controls you through the use of language. Like, this is identity politics. And so it's weird. People are like, oh, liberals are for identity politics. Dude, everything is identity politics. Language is identity politics. Because what are you? If you're gay, what are you? Are you a sodomite? This is Foucault's literal example. Because in the 19th century, you were a sodomite, which means the act that you were committing with another man was against the rules of God. Sodom, which God destroyed with fire and brimstone. Well, then, when psychology gets into it, sodomites change into homosexuals. It's less religious. It's less moral. And now it's a disease. It's a problem in your brain. This is where a lot of people are today who are like, conversion therapy. I don't want to be gay, or I don't want my son to be gay, so we'll just tell him not to be gay, and we'll go through it because you could choose not to be gay. Being gay is a choice. That's homosexual. That's the word homosexual. It's something that can be cured. It's very scientific. Homosexual. A man who has sex with men. Homosexual. Done. Right? But then what happens? In the 60s, homosexuals start calling themselves gay. Because being a homosexual is not something they wanted to fix. They were fine. In fact, they were happy. And so they took a word that meant happy. And he said, I'm gay. I'm happy with who I am. And it's a possessive noun, which completely changed the word. So all those songs that were like, I'm so gay, from the 20s, suddenly are now way different and a little, funny. But you changed it to, the people themselves changed it to gay. And then it gets complicated because then you go, well, I'm not gay, I'm bi, and they find new words to describe who they really are. But notice, it's the church who named people sodomites and said God hates them. And then it was science that named them homosexuals and said we can fix this problem. And then people named themselves gay, that they were happy. Well, that's control. Who's controlling the narrative? And that's what Foucault is talking about. That's what Rousseau, 300 years, is talking about. How all of these rules are created. Why can't I eat the apple behind the fence? It's an apple. Because the fence says someone owns it. Well, who said that someone owns it? Who made that rule? Where is that? Where did that come from? It's a lie. God gave us everything to share. Capitalism is a lie. It is someone who put up a fence and says, you have to give me money for this apple. And everyone else said, okay. And somehow we went along with it. That's all made up. It's fake. So Rousseau sees civilization itself and all the rules on your behavior as ruining people, as putting pressure on people, as breaking people. It is civilization, as Freud wrote, and it's discontents. But then where does law come from? Wait. Hobbes has law coming from the strong government. Locke has law coming from a general agreement to create a government. Still comes from government. Law still comes from government, but through a general kind of agreement that this kind of government will create laws. Rousseau says we don't need a government. He says we have the general will. We have laws that people just know are laws. They just know in their hearts. They know murdering their children is bad. You shouldn't do it. So that's the general will. It's the laws everyone knows are proper laws. How does this work? Well, I don't know. Like Rousseau literally doesn't tell you how the general will works. How do you figure out how the general will works? I don't know. He didn't know. And it's funny because this is the very famous statement by the Supreme Court Justice over what is pornography. And in fact, it is American law. Because you might go to general law, that's stupid. And yet, this is how pornography works. This is how, whatchamacallit works. Whether something is, what's the word? Legal or not, profane. Whether it's acceptable in its profanity. Should it be censored? And the very famous answer is from one Supreme Court Justice who said, I can't explain pornography, but I know it when I see it. And so there's an idea that what profanity is what's called community standards. Yeah, New York is different than Birmingham, Alabama. And so what is profane in New York, or what isn't profane in New York, should be allowed in New York. And what is profane in Birmingham should be censored in Birmingham. And that's the general will. It's this kind of amorphous, you call it like you see it type of thing. But it's not one person likes child pornography, so it's okay. It's the society as a whole comes to the agreement that you don't really have to stop at a stop sign. You can kind of roll through it if you're kind of slow. And then you could start up again. Like, you have to slow down like 85%, and then you could start up again, right? That's kind of the way the suburbs work. And the guy who just kind of keeps gunning, the guy who goes 45 miles with his truck right through the red light, we all know he's wrong. But also the guy who hits the stop sign and basically just takes his foot off the gas but doesn't really try to stop and just kind of rolls through it, and then the back of the flatbed is past the stop sign and then guns it again. We all know that guy should get a ticket too. You've seen that. I've seen that. You're like, no. That's taking the rolling through the stop too far. You deserve a ticket for that. I wish I was a cop right now. How many times have you ever been there, been like, I don't care what the letter of the law is. I know what the spirit of it is, and I wish I was a cop right now so I could give you a ticket for that. That's the general will. It's this agreement. So you don't need government. Do you have a right of revolution? Sure. Because you don't really need government. This is going to be the romantics. This is libertarians on steroids. Because it's the idea that everyone can just get together. This is Rousseau has the most perfect idea of a democratic society. You'll get together, you'll vote on stuff, but there'll be a general consensus and agreement that everyone will just kind of agree. And there's a bit of the Constitution in that. That's how the Senate works. The Senate works. That's why you have the senators can speak for as long as they want. You have the filibuster. You have the idea that you need 60 votes for anything to pass. You have this. Well, we should have a general agreement. The Senate should be, hey, we're all rich guys. We all know each other. We're all friends. So let's agree. The general will. So that's the end of the Enlightenment. We're going to now put the Enlightenment in action in the Age of Revolution. We're going to see who's right. Rousseau, Locke, Hobbes, a combination. But these ideas of the Enlightenment were meant to make people freer, or to try to understand what is people's relationship to government, to society, to each other. The Enlightenment is the first major attempt at philosophy that's not Christian and that's updated from the Greeks. That is not purely religious. The Reformation is religious in its philosophy. The Middle Ages are religious in their philosophy. These guys, while religious, none of them explain that God made government. They're all humanists. They're all talking about people. And now, the Age of Revolution, which we're going to talk about next, will put those thoughts into motion. Thank you. Be safe.